Welcome to the podcast. It's the magical holidays. Time for Joe watching 60 Christmas movies in 60 days. Why, you might ask? Because it sounds like a crazy task to be watching 60 Christmas movies in 60 days. It'll be struggle, no I won't lie. By the halfway point I will lose my mind, but with your support I'm gonna be fine. So let's have a blast on this Christmas time. Join me now and let's find out about today's Christmas movie. Was it good or bad? Happy or sad? Is there another dead mom and dad? Let's get to it with no delay. It's your old pal Joe and he's happy to say welcome to Joe watches 60 Christmas movies in 60 days.
How's it going, everybody? It's me, it's your old pal Joe, and welcome to episode 57 of Joe Watches 60 Christmas Movies in 60 Days. Huzzah! We're up to episode 57. Of course, before we can talk about the movie, we must talk about my good friends over at Third Eye Comics. Third Eye Comics, your haven, your headquarters, your comrades in arms. If you're talking about something in the world of comic books, graphic novels, gaming, movies, music, pop culture, snacks, friendship, babysitting, shoe tying, and so much more. They have everything you need for any of those topics. And they have so much more. So if you're interested in supporting the store because they supported me for this season, please check them out at one of their multitude in the stores in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. Or, of course, and as always, you can go to shop.thirdeyecomics.com. That is shop.thirdeyecomics.com. Order something for yourself, or, you know what, order something for me. I'd appreciate it. Let's talk about today's movie. Today's movie is a perfect Christmas pairing. Yet another wine movie. We open in a big city at Christmas. Lights everywhere, a poppy Christmas song plays. I believe we find out at some point we are in Atlanta. We then cut to inside of a restaurant where we watch the cooks hard at work in the kitchen. This is where we meet our main character and the head chef of the restaurant, Grace. She banters with the restaurant owner Silas about some burnt Brussels sprouts. She then gets a call from her uncle, who owns a vineyard, of course. She calls to check in. He's just calling to check in on his niece to see how she's doing, but to also let the restaurant owner know that he sent some wine the restaurant's way. She also talks to her aunt about her super busy Christmas schedule. The restaurant is fully reserved every night through New Year's. She'll be working every day. Later, she finds out super famous restaurant reviewer Delaney Fox is there. That's right, the Delaney Fox is at the restaurant. She's a Michelin star food critic. Grace says that that's like the Super Bowl. The restaurant owner, Silas, says, I don't speak sports. And then I got a little mad at this movie. What do you mean? You don't know what the Super Bowl is? It's like the Super Bowl of something. Oh, Jesus Christ, what the fuck is a Super Bowl? Is it like a big bowl? Like a bowl you can have soup in? Come on now. Anyway, Grace delivers the dessert herself to Delaney Fox, and Delaney Fox is, well, kind of rude. We cut to Grace watching a happy couple eat dinner. Silas, the restaurant owner, says that could be her one day. Grace says her vision board is too full for something like that. After closing, there's more talk between Grace and Silas. She mentions her aunt and uncle's winery. It's also a bed and breakfast now. She grew up there. He mentions living with lumberjacks and how they had him believing in everything from Santa Claus to Bigfoot. She asks, wait, do you really believe in Santa Claus? And he tells her he believes in everything, including Grace. They wish each other a good night. When she gets home, she makes herself a frozen dinner and pours herself a glass of wine. She then sits back and reads Wine and Dine magazine. The next morning, the review from Delaney Fox is posted. Grace reads it. We then cut to her racing to the restaurant. She's trying to call Silas, but he isn't answering his phone. When she gets to the restaurant, Silas says, don't worry, I've already seen the review. We're not going to worry about it. We're moving on. Turns out the review wasn't so good. Grace quotes a bad line from the review and then says that this was her one shot at a Michelin star. If you're not sure what a Michelin star is, it's an award it's a sort of an award. It's a designation that's given to restaurants of great merit. It ties in with the Michelin Tire Company, and it's something to do, I believe, originally with giving people a notable place that they could go on their travels while they're using, of course, their Michelin tires and they're driving around. I don't know if that's accurate, but that makes sense in my head. If you know the true story, you can let me know at JOEMOC on social medias everywhere. Anyway, this was her one shot. Silas tells her that she needs to take a few days off and suggests that she visit her aunt and uncle. Cut to Grace on the road. On the way, she stops at a bookstore and finds a book reading going on. The guy talking comes off like a pompous jerk, talking about his favorite places to visit in Greece and how he can't name them or else they'll lose their touristy charm. This is our eventual love interest, Asher. He's there to talk about his new book, Open Table, Open World. He starts talking about wine, and Grace can't help but comment under her breath about something that he gets wrong or something she disagrees with. This starts a back and forth with Asher about where to get the best wine or when to go to Europe for the best wine, etc. He wraps up his reading and finds Grace in the store. He mentions that he knows a lot about Christmas. He's a Christmas expert who has spent Christmas with families around the world. This does not matter, but he says it anyway. He then offers her a copy of another book of his. He tries to find out more about Grace, but she playfully heads out and off to her aunt and uncle's bed and breakfast. Cut to her arriving at her aunt and uncle's winery. Her aunt and uncle are so happy to see her. Then she runs into Felicity, who works there and is a pal. They're so happy to see each other. We find out they have a cafe on the vineyard, and she runs it. Unfortunately, it's struggling a bit at the moment. We find out they also don't have a stove at the moment because it broke down. And this never comes up again. And eventually spoiler, Grace helps out at the cafe. And she makes foods that would require a stove. And I don't know, so why was this line thrown in there that they don't currently have a stove? We never see one being purchased. Was it just a silly line, like to show how rough things are for the cafe, that they basically don't have a stove even though they do? I don't know. Cut to Grace helping her aunt and uncle decorate the Christmas tree. She admits that she's there for more than catching up with them. She talks about the bad review and how upset it made her. They tell her not to focus on these random reviews. Then Rita, the head of the Wine Growers Association, stops by. The music playing in the background treats her like a major villain. We find out from Felicity that Rita wants to buy the vineyard. Felicity and Grace continue to chat. Felicity mentions her brother is coming to town for Christmas. Then the brother walks in, and who should it be but Asher from the book reading? He's Felicity's brother. Grace is shocked. Then cut to Rita, the villain, talking to Grace's aunt and uncle. She pushes them to sell the vineyard, even they have no interest in doing so. Jump over to Grace and Asher talking about Asher's travel writing. He guesses he got the travel bug from his dad, who also wrote about travel. Grace and Asher chat and chat and chat. Back to Rita, the villain, with Grace's aunt and uncle. She keeps pushing them to sell the vineyard. Next, Felicity, Asher, Grace show up, and they play a game of cork tossing. This is where they toss corks into an open barrel. Grace sinks hers. Yeah. Then the group decides to have pizza for game night that night. There's lots of joking around within the group, and then we cut to after dinner where Asher and Grace, guess what? They chat, but it's still game night. We find out they're playing bingo, but calling it Santa. We learn that both Asher and Grace are planning to head out of town by Christmas morning. Asher will be heading back out on the road for his travel writing, and Grace will be heading back home to the restaurant. Cut to Asher and Felicity hanging out. He thinks Grace's family is really nice. Felicity pushes Asher to make a move on Grace. She thinks he likes her. He admits he does, maybe, but relationships don't work for him. He's always on the road. Back to Grace and her aunt and uncle. Her aunt found something in the house. It's her mom's old cookbook. Grace is so happy to see this cookbook. She hasn't thought of it in years. We cut to Asher reading a pamphlet on the 7 wonders of the world. He decides to look up info on Grace. He finds the negative review. The next morning, we see Grace reading her mom's cookbook as she thinks about lines from the negative review. She then sees a recipe in the cookbook that she wants to make. Cut to Asher talking to Felicity. He mentions he thinks Grace is visiting to get away from the bad review. He also is going to stop by on his way out of town and bring them some coffee. After the call, Grace chats with Felicity about Asher. This was a phone call, by the way. After the call, Grace walks up and chats with Felicity about Asher and his many trips. She thinks it would be nice to have such freedom like he does. Back over to Asher. When he stops at the coffee shop, Rita the villain chats him up. She's planning on revitalizing the whole area. He asks if the area asked for it. She says people never ask for what they need. She is such an arch villain here. We then see Grace go to a wine shop because she needed a specific wine for the recipe that she wants to try, and her aunt and uncle didn't have it at their vineyard. While she's talking to the owner of the wine shop, we get more details about Rita and her efforts to buy up local businesses. Anyway, the owner doesn't have the wine that Grace needs. Grace leaves, and Asher goes into the same exact store. She finds out that he's headed to the vineyard and remembers that she does have a wine similar to what Grace would need, and so she gives it to Asher to give to Grace. While this goes down, she asks Asher if something might be happening between the two of them. He assures her there's nothing between him and Grace. Cut to Asher making his delivery of coffee and wine to Grace. They chat a lot. We find out Grace wears a special apron made by her mom. She's happy to be able to finish her recipe with the right wine. It's fondue. They taste it and it's good. They also giggle a lot. Then they go on a tour of the vineyard. She talks about how envious she is of him and his travels. He's a bit envious of having a stable life the way she does. He shows off a compass his dad gave to him. Eventually she heads off to do stuff in the cafe, and Asher texts someone to tell them he's going to hold off on his departure for another day. Seems he wants to stick around a bit longer than expected. Grace returns and talk turns to Rita. I don't know. So she left to do something at the cafe. He calls somebody about delaying his departure, and then she just comes back and they keep talking. They eventually start talking about Rita the villain. Asher is worried that she's trying to take over the vineyard. I mean, she literally is, but he keeps implying that there's something nefarious going on. And I swear to God, this movie will never explain what it is. Let's get to it. Out of nowhere, he says the only way to stop Rita from taking over the vineyard is for Grace to stay in town and inherit the vineyard. This doesn't make any sense, but we're going to have to go with it because that's what the movie does. Cut to Grace giving her aunt and uncle and Felicity some ideas she had for the cafe. She then heads off to a store to buy some napkins. She also calls her restaurant and tells Silas that she's going to need to stay a few more days with her aunt and uncle to help them out. He is fully supportive of this. In fact, he tells her to stay through Christmas. Cut to the store from earlier. Asher is there and talking to the store owner. Grace arrives to get napkins and overhears them talking about Rita, but she thinks they're talking about her for some reason. I guess she has a really poor sense of self-worth because they're saying she's so overbearing and she tries too hard and she's not honest. And she hears this and goes, God damn, they must be talking about me. When Asher gets back to the vineyard, Grace is very mean to him. He is confused. She says she overheard him talking to the store owner. He immediately understands what she means and explains that they were talking about Rita. Grace feels bad. Cut to everyone having dinner. Grace admits to everyone that she originally visited because of the bad review. Everyone is supportive of her. Then they go outside to watch a meteor shower. Grace and Asher chat even more. He tells a tale of his dad taking a big boat trip by himself and how it led to him meeting Asher's mom. His dad then gave his mom the compass that Asher carries to this day. Also, Grace and her aunt and uncle decide to plan for a big reopening of the cafe to coincide with Grace's new menu. It'll be on Christmas Eve. The next day we get an appearance by Rita the villain. She wants to survey the grounds of the vineyard, but Grace won't let her. Instead, she invites her to the big cafe reopening. Cut to Asher researching Rita the villain and trying to figure out what she's up to. He calls his lawyer and tells him that he might need his help with something. We get a cooking montage with Grace, her aunt, and Felicity. Asher also stops by to talk with Grace's uncle. They chat about Grace and how her mom got sick and passed away when Grace was only 8. Her dad passed away the very next year. Asher is really into Grace. And at that moment, that's who walks in. Asher explains to the group that he'd like to share a tradition he's picked up from his travels. They should all write letters to Father Christmas. Once they're done, they can throw their letters into a fireplace and the ashes will be carried off to the North Pole. After explaining this and people start writing their letters, Asher and Grace chat even more. Then she gives him a cork from the winery as a token to remember them by when he's back on his travels. Cut to him taking a taxi to the airport. It's now Christmas Eve. Grace puts the finishing touches on her big relaunch menu. The rest of the group finish decorating for the big relaunch. Then it's time for the big relaunch. Rita the villain hides outside and watches, and then she's chased away by a dog. Everyone laughs. That's not true, but that's what the movie wants you to do. The movie wants you to laugh. Inside, Asher arrives. He decided to come back in case Grace needed his help. He's not leaving. Grace is really touched. Then Grace and her uncle speak to the guests about thanking them for all attending and thanking them for their support and thank them for coming to the grand reopening. Everyone toasts at the end. Then they light the big Christmas tree they've set up. Everyone cheers. Then Grace gets a call from her boss, Silas, at her restaurant. They found out that the critic, that's right, what's her name? Delaney Fox is coming back. She's coming back the day after Christmas. Then Asher gets a call from his lawyer. Whatever they found out about Rita is a big deal, and it's going to be front page news. He doesn't explain exactly what the story is. The next day, this is Christmas Day, Asher talks to Grace before he leaves town. He mentions that she almost forgot her lucky apron behind. He hands it to her and they say goodbye. She gives him a big hug. She drives off to go back to Atlanta, back to her restaurant. She arrives back at her restaurant, ready to get to work. We get a cooking montage as she makes stuff from her mom's cookbook. Then she gives samples to her waitstaff and they love it. Now it's time to serve the big critic. That's right, Delaney Fox is back. While waiting to get feedback, Grace realizes Asher included his compass in the pocket of her apron. She tells Silas that she needs to get back. She needs to go back to her aunt and uncle's. As she drives, the radio plays a story about some big takedown of Rita and quote-unquote big wine. This movie never explains what exactly happened. Grace arrives and immediately sees Asher at the winery. She tells him that his compass led her back to where she needs to be with people that she loves. He also apparently told his boss that he needs to take some time away from traveling. They kiss. The end. This movie was like watching myself fall asleep. I tried my best to take notes. I was distracted throughout. I did my best, I promise, and I promise I watched the entire thing. But this movie was not particularly interesting. It wasn't the worst movie ever, but I had such a hard time watching this fucking movie. And that's why this is going to end up being one of the 2 or 3 shortest episodes of the season. Yay! Question mark? Anyway, that's it for episode 57. That's it for a perfect Christmas pairing. This movie did not make sense at times, but we do not have the energy or the wherewithal to worry about it. We must move on. We must move on. Thanks for listening. Thank you for hanging out. And until next time, take care.